The pre-Adamites on Mars decided to flee to Earth with their last 3 working motherships immediately before the solar event. The occupants of the moon were desperate to evacuate, as many of the moon's inhabitants as well. Less than 300 pre-Adamite royals and scientists made it to the stasis chambers on the remnants of 3 motherships. They also managed to save some genetic creations in stasis chambers on adjacent floors. The first floor of the stasis chambers housed chimera red-haired giants and other genetically mixed beings. The second floor held scientific and engineering casts of the pre-Adamite civilization. The third, lowest floor, was reserved for the royal caste. This floor was most insulated from the solar event. Additionally, deep underground cavern systems were populated with a priest caste, the custodians of the frozen city. They passed cultural traditions, secrets, and instructions on stasis chamber and pod maintenance to future generations. However, many of their secrets and practices were lost due to the custodians' hardships and shallow genetic pool. On Earth, the ICC and ruling elites practiced the old religion and traced their lineage to the pre-Adamite bloodlines. They call the pre-Adamites the progenitor race and worship them as the old gods of Atlantis. This old religion ultimately came from the Orion group when they influenced the pre-Adamites thousands of years prior. The practice of the old religion and worship of progenitor gods predisposed the ICC to the Orion group temptations, including advanced technologies and religion that mirrored the old religion they already practiced. Since the pre-Adamites destroyed the ancient defense grid around our local stellar neighborhood, they broke the quarantine, allowing the Orion group access to Earth. Because of their actions, the pre-Adamites were responsible for the negative timeline on Earth. After their secret meeting on the Lunar Operations Command, the ICC Council determined that the Orion Group could not avoid the cosmic trials, which the Super Federation would oversee, as ordered by the New Guardians. The ICC Council traveled to Antarctica to consult with the custodians. While on board the Mayan reconnaissance craft, we observed a small group of the pre-Adamite custodians, dressed in ceremonial robes, walking into the bottom floor of stasis chambers, which entombed the royals, below 2 miles of the ice sheet. The custodians dropped yellow and red flower petals on the floor, as the beating of small drums echoed throughout the walls of the old mothership. The ICC Council leadership entered the large room in single file, dressed in red hooded robes. One of the custodians held a young woman, under the influence of a drug or in a trance. The custodian came to the foot of one of the stasis pods. The ICC handed the custodian a young woman, whom he sacrificed with an ornate knife. He then turned and placed a long metal rod through several metal hoops that connected to levers. The metal rod joined all of the levers. Once he pulled one lever, all the levers moved simultaneously, opening the stasis chambers, which separated and split in half. The frosty cold mist started emanating out of the individual pods. After a few minutes, we heard moans and saw movement through the misty fog coming out of the stasis pods. One by one, pre-Adamite beings emerged out of the pods, soaking wet, covered in slime, and shivering as if they were suffering from hypothermia. The custodian spoke to the newly awoken, very confused royalty. After a short discussion, the confusion of the freshly awoken pre-Adamites turned to shock and absolute fear. After a short conversation with the royals, one of the custodians turned to the ICC Council and said, "What have we done? We should not have awakened them." The custodians explained that much of their oral and other traditions were lost, including when to awaken the royal class. The pre-Adamite royals used AI technology to predict the probable future on Earth. They saw that humanity would most likely choose the negative timeline, which would allow them to escape judgment from the Super Federation. The custodians explained that if the royals were awakened early, it would indicate that their probable future predictions were incorrect, and an unknown timeline would develop. They said the royals were not supposed to be awakened until after the next solar event. At this point, Emi, the Zulu elder on board the Mayan craft, took a deep breath and said, "It is time." Emi then teleported down to the deck of the pre-Adamite mothership. The newly awoken pre-Adamites began to yell out angrily to the custodians and ICC council while pointing and shaking their fists. Emmy then started speaking the pre-Adamite language, and suddenly another being appeared in the room. It was one of the Super Federation groups we call the Shining Ones. They were over 8 feet tall, had luminescent white skin, white curly hair, and eyes with eyes that glowed like the lid end of a cigar. One of the Shining Ones pulled a large scroll out of its belt and started reading. As it read, each word boomed and echoed through the old mothership, causing the pre-Adamites, the custodians, and the ICC council to drop to their knees with their hands over their ears. Emmy was the only one on his feet, dancing around with a huge smile on his face. When the Shining One finished reading the scroll, Emmy yelled, "It's done," and then called out in a loud tribal scream, dropping to the floor on both knees, clapping his hands in front of him. The custodians and pre-Adamite royalty began scurrying and running away from hundreds of small blue orbs that entered the room. Some of the orbs passed through the ceiling to the other stasis chamber floors. The blue orbs swooped through the room, absorbing up pre-Adamites and their genetic creations from the floors above. Emmy then addressed the ICC. He said, "The cosmic trials from the old solar cycle are now underway. Woe to those of you who will be tried for this one." He then turned to the body of the sacrificed woman on the floor and said, "I cannot find a semblance of compassion or sanity on this planet. This was completely unnecessary." He bent over and extended his hand over the body of the sacrificed woman, who came to life. She stood up and looked around the room, and then back at Emmy, who smiled, took her hand, and then vanished from the deck of the ancient mothership, leaving the ICC completely slack-jawed at what they had just witnessed. At this point, the Ansher began hugging and celebrating, and then turned to the SSP Alliance Council, and told us that as scary as this timeline appeared, everything was on course for the most optimal timeline and future for our planet. For the first time, humanity is in charge of the timeline decisions. The choice humans make and the timeline we choose will define the solar event and the trials themselves. Good described one of his remote viewings, while serving in the 20 and Back program on Solar Warden, regarding a solar flash. He described a plasma flash emanating from the sun and hitting the earth. All positively oriented people came together, holding hands and happily singing. All negative people looked like they were falling backward from Earth and disappearing. The pre-Adamite set humanity on a negative timeline, but the choice is now ours, to repeat the negative timeline cycle, or choose freedom in a positive timeline. The new Guardians, the Federation of Local Planets, and the Super Federation are doing their part to help us, but our collective dictates their actions. They are waiting to see if we will stand up and refuse the current enslavement, or if we will collapse under our trauma, falling into another negative cycle. Be patient, be strong, stand up. We are in this together.